Imagine standing in an open field at dawn, the air freezing, your stomach empty, your family depending on you to come back with food, and then you see it, not a deer, not a rabbit, a mammoth, a walking mountain covered in fur, armed with tusks long enough to lift you off the ground like a rag doll. And somehow, unbelievably, your ancestors looked at that monster and thought, yeah, we can kill that. That is what makes early humans so terrifyingly impressive. Because primitive humans were not just trying to survive against nature, they were fighting some of the biggest, strongest, and most nightmarish animals that have ever existed. Woolly mammoths, giant ground sloths, terror birds, creatures that looked less like wildlife and more like boss fights. And yet those humans won. So how did a species with no claws, no fangs, no armor, and no super strength manage to hunt animals that looked completely unstoppable? That is what we are getting into today. This is primitive humans versus megafauna. And honestly, this story feels illegal to even tell. Because once you understand what our ancestors were up against, you stop seeing them as weak cave people and start seeing them for what they really were, absolute monsters. Let's start with the mammoth. If you have ever seen an elephant, imagine one bigger, hairier, meaner, and built for a world of ice, hunger, and death. A mammoth was not just large. It was the kind of animal that made the ground feel different when it walked. The kind of creature that made a human being look laughably small. One wrong move near a mammoth, and you were finished, crushed, gored, trampled, erased, and still humans hunted them. Now picture the scene. A small group of hunters hiding in the cold, watching, waiting, tracking a herd for hours or even days. They are not charging in like action heroes, they are using patience, positioning, terrain. They know they cannot beat a mammoth in a fair fight, so they do what humans have always done best. They make the fight unfair. They drive the animal toward mud, toward narrow ground, toward ravines, toward places where size becomes a disadvantage. They throw spears from a distance. They exhaust it. They confuse it. They isolate it from the herd. Every hunter has a role. Every movement matters. And if one person panics, somebody dies. This was not brute force. This was strategy. And that is the part people forget. Primitive humans were not stupid. They did not survive because they were lucky. They survived because they were intelligent enough to turn teamwork into a weapon. They turned communication into a weapon. They turned planning into a weapon. The mammoth may have had the body of a tank, but humans had something much more dangerous, a coordinated idea. And when that mammoth finally fell, it was not just a meal. It was everything: food, fur, bone, shelter materials, tools, warmth, survival. One successful hunt could mean life for an entire group through brutal conditions that would kill most modern people in a weekend. Now let's talk about giant ground sloths, because this one sounds fake. When you hear the word sloth, you probably picture a cute little tree animal moving at the speed of a lazy thought. Forget all of that. Giant ground sloths were huge, heavy, muscular, built like prehistoric wrecking machines. These were not harmless little fuzzballs. These were towering animals with massive claws that looked like they belonged on a horror movie monster. Imagine being an early human and seeing one of these things stand up. That is the moment you realize nature was doing entirely too much back then. A giant sloth did not need to be fast to be terrifying. It had reach, it had power, it had the kind of size that made direct combat a terrible idea. If you got too close at the wrong time, those claws could open you up in seconds. So again, humans adapted. Instead of matching raw strength, they used endurance, they tracked, they pressured, they harassed from a distance, they forced these animals to keep moving, to stay alert, to burn energy. Humans were not the strongest creatures in the prehistoric world, but they were relentless. They could keep going, they could keep following, they could keep forcing the situation until the larger animal made a mistake. That is one of the greatest superpowers humans ever developed. Not overwhelming force, relentless persistence. A mammoth could overpower you, a giant sloth could shred you, but neither one could think like a hunting group of humans who were willing to stay on your trail until the end of the earth. And then we get to the terror bird. This one is just disrespectful. A giant flightless bird built like a land-based predator, with long legs, a brutal beak, and the speed to turn your worst day into your last day. If you saw one of these sprinting toward you across open ground, you would not be thinking about evolution. You would be thinking about apologies to everyone for everything. Because terror birds were not just weird, they were built to kill, fast enough to chase, strong enough to overpower smaller prey, aggressive enough to dominate their environment. This was a bird that said, "No thanks, I do not need to fly. I will just become a nightmare instead." So how do humans deal with that? The same way they dealt with everything else. They refuse to play by the animal's rules. A terror bird wants speed, surprise, and panic. Humans answer with traps, numbers, projectiles, and timing. If one human is alone, that is a disaster waiting to happen. But humans were rarely at their most dangerous when they were alone. They were at their most dangerous when they were together. That is the pattern across all of this. Primitive humans did not dominate because each individual was physically superior. They dominated because groups of humans could create situations that no megafauna was prepared for. Spears coming from multiple angles, fire driving animals into open spaces, noise, pressure, movement, coordination. A hunting party of humans was not just a few people with sticks, it was a system. And systems beat giants. That is really the big lesson here. When people hear the phrase primitive humans, they imagine people who were somehow less than us, less intelligent, less capable, less aware. But honestly, put most modern people in a prehistoric landscape and it would be over immediately. No grocery stores, no police, no roads, no medicine, no internet, no walls, just weather, hunger, predators, and whatever courage you brought with you. Our ancestors lived in that reality full time, and they were hunting the largest animals on Earth in it. That takes a level of toughness that is hard to even process. It also forces us to think about a darker side of the story, because once humans got good at hunting megafauna, really good, the balance started to shift. These giant animals had lived and adapted for ages. Then humans arrived, and suddenly they were facing an enemy that could plan, adapt, cooperate, and improve weapons over time. A mammoth could not invent a better tusk next season. A terror bird could not redesign its strategy. But humans could learn from every failed hunt, every injury, every near-death experience, every success. That made us different from every other predator. We did not just hunt, we got better at hunting, and better, until some of the greatest animals to ever walk the planet were no longer around. That is the brutal truth hiding inside this story. Primitive humans were not just survivors, they were ecosystem changers. Once people entered a landscape, things changed. Big animals that had ruled their worlds for ages suddenly had to deal with a predator that could think ahead. A predator that could throw a weapon, a predator that could pass down knowledge. That predator was us. And that is why this topic is so fascinating, because it is not really just about mammoths or sloths or terror birds. It is about what humans actually are. We are not the fastest, we are not the strongest, we are not the most naturally armed, but give us a challenge, give us a group, give us a reason, and humans become one of the most dangerous things this planet has ever produced. Your ancestors proved that every time they walked into a frozen plain and decided they were going to bring down something 10 times their size. Think about the courage that required. Think about the fear. Think about standing there with a spear in your hand, hearing a mammoth scream, feeling the ground shake, knowing that if your timing is off by 1 second, your life is over, and then doing it anyway. That is who you come from. Not weak people, not simple people, not clueless cave dwellers grunting in the dark. You come from people who stared down monsters and found a way to win. So the next time somebody talks about primitive humans like they were somehow inferior, remember this. These people hunted giants. They took on walking tanks, clawed beasts, and murderous birds from hell with little more than teamwork, sharp tools, and the refusal to quit. They did not need modern technology to be dangerous. They already were. And maybe that is the wildest part of all. The same brain that built cities, satellites, and smartphones is the brain that once figured out how to bring down a mammoth in the snow. The same species that scrolls social media at 2 in the morning used to coordinate hunts against creatures that could kill them in seconds. That ancient instinct is still in us. It's the fear, the planning, the adaptability, the part of the human mind that sees something impossible and says, maybe not, maybe we can take it. And sometimes, somehow we do it. If you made it to the end, drop a comment with the one megafauna you would least want to encounter alone. Mammoth, giant sloth, or terror bird. Hit like, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.